Welcome to today's webinar on ideology in arts and literature of the Xi Jinping era. The idea for this meeting originated with our research on Chinese culture conducted at the SWPS University in Poland as part of the China Horizons research grant funded by the European Commission. In the research, which is part of a wider effort of over 30 scholars and analysts from 9 different European think tanks and universities, we look at Chinese literary and artistic works of the last 12 years, trying to gain a deeper understanding of modern Chinese society through culture. And so we look especially at works exploring social issues, but also at the way these issues are communicated to domestic audiences. And this brings us smoothly to the topic of this webinar, where we'll be discussing how ideology influences the arts and how writers and artists function in this reality of national mobilization around party ideology and party values. Joining me today is our special guest, Professor Olga Lomová from Charles University in Prague, Czechia. Professor Lomová's interests range from Tang and 6th dynasties poetry and early Chinese historiography to the history of European study of China and on PRC ideology and self-representation. Since 2002, Professor Lomová is director of the CCKF International Sinological Center at Charles University. In 2016, she co-funded the Synopsis project, which brings academic knowledge about China and Chinese politics to the general public. Let me just add that Professor Lomová is also an outside expert of the China Horizons Consortium. Professor Lomová will deliver a 20-minute keynote, which will be followed by a discussion. Professor Lomová, welcome to this webinar.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this nice and generous introduction.
Well, thank you very much. Before you start, I would just like to introduce two other guests who are joining us. It's František Reis-Miller and Piotr Matchajek from our SWPS research team. So František and Piotr, welcome to the show as well.
Hello, glad to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. So now I think it's a good time, Olga, for you to start. So the floor is yours, and we'll be listening to your presentation, after which we will start it.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Again, I emphasize I am very pleased to be here, and it has always been my pleasure to collaborate with Professor Jacobi and with my former student, František Reis-Miller. I am really delighted to have him on the panel, and of course, Piotr as well. My keynote will not be a full-fledged talk because I have just 20 minutes. I would rather do some preliminary remarks pointing out to the role of ideology in Chinese literature and art in the People's Republic of China in a more general framework. And then I would like to say a few words about Xi Jinping efforts, how he connects with this framework and how he utilizes it, and in a sense, how he revives the old models of role of ideology in literature and art. For the beginning, let me say just a very simple remark. It is, of course, very complicated to speak about ideology in general terms. We can define ideology in many different ways, and in certain sense, every society has its ideology that somehow impacts our thought, our behavior, our literary tastes, our literary creation. I use the term ideology in my remarks as a very particular concept, which is typical and has been developed in the People's Republic of China, actually before the People's Republic was established by the Communist Party of China. So this is basically, in a simplified manner, I can call it Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. It has its transformations, with some basics remaining as stable. When discussing with my colleagues in Prague who don't work on China but work on ideology, they are always puzzled because in the general understanding, ideology is a fixed complex, or is a complex of thought which is well developed, and if you deviate in some way, you somehow change ideology. But in this case, if my definition and the reality of China is that basically at the center of this ideology is the understanding of the crucial role of the Communist Party as a historically predetermined power that guides the society, and it also guides literature and art. The idea was first, let's say, canonized by Mao Zedong in 1942 in Yan'an during the famous Yan'an Conference on Literature and Art. So the conference is usually, you have the titles there, you can read it. I very much recommend reread these old documents because they are becoming very up to date today. And there is, I pointed out, there is a Czech translation from 1950, but there are translations in Polish, German, French, any other language. But the Czech translation was done independently on their own initiative by Czech sinologists, so not exported from the People's Republic. So what is important to take into account when we talk about Mao Zedong thought on literature and art in the context of contemporary China is to keep in mind this is not theory of literature or some philosophy of literature and art as it is somehow presented. This is a practical policy, how literature should be embedded within the, and art, I always emphasize literature, embedded within the policy and program and revolutionary activities of the Communist Party. So the basics of Mao Zedong thought on literature of art are not complexities, how much it is Marxist and how much it is not Marxist, as some scholars would discuss. It is basically a very practical statement, a program saying that those who create literature and art and intellectuals in general should be totally subordinated to the needs of the party. And it is closely related to the idea of re-education, of changing the mind, changing the ideas the writers and artists carry on and believe themselves in. And it is also a very clear statement that literature and art, its main purpose is to serve the needs of the revolution. We will see that there are some shifts in contemporary China, but this basic subordination of the intellectual activities to the needs of the party remains unchanged. Actually, the Yan'an talks have become, after 1949, let's say, a basic document of cultural policy in China and something which is embedded in the structures, the institutions of literature and art and culture as they were built after 1949 and as they still exist today and are essential for the cultural life, even though due to the economic reforms, they are more and more, let's say, independent artists or independent writers outside of the system, but they are still a minority. The majority is still somehow institutionally placed within the society, the writers' society or the society for art on the central level and on provincial level and even lower levels. I am just not going to describe it. The Yan'an talks were also a very infamous during the Cultural Revolution because they were brought up as the core, the central idea of, as formulating the central ideas for literature and art, and were used for criticizing and attacking the intellectuals. So after the Cultural Revolution ended and was officially proclaimed that it is over, and it was 10 years of disaster in December 1978, the document was not particularly, let's say, promoted. It was still there. It was never refuted. It was still part of the dogma, but was in the shadow. What's interesting for Xi Jinping era, that it suddenly started to be held as the central document important for Chinese culture. And we have particularly the 2022 commemoration of the Yan'an Conference, during which many speeches were given, including Xi Jinping speeches. A lot of space was dedicated to these events. And I just pointed out on the slide the, let's say, three important issues which were raised in these media writings, and of course in Xi Jinping's important speech, as it is called, 重要讲话. So, 以人民为中心, at the center of everything is the people. We should understand that the people is not just the people around. It is the people as defined by the Marxist-Leninist view of society. So, and the party is the essence of the people and the representative of the people. So if you say that you serve the people or that everything is for the people, it is the people as understood, perceived, and represented by the party. What is new, what was not so importantly present in Mao's talk in 1942 is the emphasis of literature and art, not in the service of revolution, but in the service of the nation and the state. Yeah, and then the emphasis on the Chinese style. If you think about what the Chinese style means, it's pretty vague, but eventually you come to the conclusion that the Chinese style is simply the style as it has developed after 1949 under the guidance and leadership of the party. Xi Jinping not only celebrated, and in Xi Jinping era, not only the Yan'an talks were celebrated, he himself made an important speech on literature and art already in 2014. You can see it on the slide. If you read the title, 在文艺工作座谈会上的讲话, so you can see that he, let's say, emulates Mao Zedong's talks from the 1942, and this is analogous to our appearances of Xi Jinping, that he, in a sense, emulates Mao Zedong, but of course is different. And even if he wanted to emulate Mao Zedong in every detail, he simply cannot replicate the past, and he cannot replicate Mao Zedong as a particular type of a person. So this speech is interesting because it was presented, it was published only in 2022. And if you read some of the language I picked out of the speech, which is pretty long, on the slide, you can see, there resonate slogans and ideas which were discussed both in Mao Zedong's talks and particularly after 1949. So this is the artistic qualities, which is an analogy to whether art should be particularly artistically refined, or whether it should rather propagate the ideas for uneducated public. Yeah, so this is the 提高和普及, one of the dichotomies of the Yan'an talks. Then you have this criticism and praise, expose and extol, again a central idea in the Yan'an talks, and then realism and romanticism. I put a little bit longer excerpt there, which basically says that the writers should be writing truths about the life of the people, but at the same time, they should be driven by the revolutionary, socialist, whatever ideas, and do not depict the dark side of society. This is one of the central issues that has been discussed in Chinese media after 1949, but also in Chinese literary theory, and particularly in 1980s, there was a very strong emphasis on not embellishing the truth of the life in the name of the communist ideal. Yeah, so this is something reversing what was very widespread in 1980s. Of course, in the Xi Jinping's speech,在文艺工作座谈会上的讲话, by coincidence, quite recently, these days, started to be promoted in the media as part of his, let's say, theory of everything, the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era. So now we already have, within this thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics, embedded, included the thought on literature and art. Well, what is new and particularly revealing about Xi Jinping is that, as I said, the central role of the party remains unchanged. Ideologically determined view of reality, the only accepted truth about the reality remains unchanged. What is new? Literature and art for powerful state and strong nation. Yeah, so it is very remarkable. Of course, everybody knows the program of the great rejuvenation of Chinese nation and this nationalistic rhetoric, which is now all over the place in China. I would like to emphasize that, like the Yan'an talks in 1942 and immediately after 1949, Xi Jinping's thought is also not cut off reality. It is not just a theoretical treatise. It is a signal to start action. And the action is to study the documents, to undergo self-criticism and change of mind, and turning the intellectuals into the reliable servants of the state, of the party and the state. And I can show you the next slide as an example. I would like to emphasize that on the slide the language that speaks about providing fundamental guidelines and be a guidance for action. I mean, Xi Jinping's talk, yeah. And I chose this example, but you could, at random, in fact, not to speak about literature, which is my inclination to speak about literature. So I chose China Academy of Art. Yeah, so it is already a published example how the ideas expressed by Xi Jinping are put in practice. Yeah, there is a study session in which people speak. They read from the speech. They comment on it, of course, positively. They cannot criticize it, and they somehow express their self-identification with the ideas Xi Jinping promoted in his talk. I selected from the article quoted on the previous slide several photographs which were accompanying the pretty long article on the study session. And you can see there the party secretary speaking, the director of the cartoon department, new media department, director of new media department, director of folk art department, and editor-in-chief of the journal Mei Shu. And there were even more people, and they are just presented as, well, seriously studying how to implement Xi Jinping's ideas. What I find revealing about the photographs, and that's why I showed them to you, is that these are all sorts of people, definitely with different aesthetic preferences, different interests in different types of art, some of them very contemporary, multimedia, new media department, yeah. Cartoon department is also rather contemporary, yeah. But they all share the same subordination ritual, yeah, subordination ritual to the, frankly speaking, nonsense which is in Xi Jinping's talk. Yes, this is empty. This is just reiterating in all ways, in all possible ways, the central role of the party in the work of the literature and art. And it also suggests that there will be changes in the party leadership to make it more loyal to Xi Jinping's program, cleaning up the party of thought which may not be totally conform to Xi Jinping's idea. To conclude, I would like to show you the last slide. We, of course, imagine. I grew up in a similar political system, and I can very easily imagine that people will be trying to live with this theory, doing their work, avoiding the perils of politics, and trying to do what they find meaningful in their way. They are artists. They really want to do meaningful things. They also want to be internationally recognized, for example. Yeah. So there will be sort of negotiating, navigating oneself around the perils, sometimes becoming victims, sometimes becoming winners by very explicit, let's say, opportunistic expression of loyalty. Yeah. Somebody may say, well, it doesn't matter. Art will thrive as it thrived before. People will find their way. I would like to point out a very old and still very valuable article by Perry Link, which you have on the last slide, about the anaconda in the chandelier, yeah, which is an article that, an essay in which Perry Link very vividly points out what does it mean to be an artist and writer in a political system like the People's Republic of China, when the party wants to be in control of everything. And paraphrasing his ideas, Perry Link's ideas on censorship, I would just say that perhaps the anaconda is now getting out of the chandelier for a short time, and we will see how long it will be out, but it may be pretty dangerous in the nearest future. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Olga. It was very insightful and a very good link between 1942 and 2014 and today. And I think the link is very important for us in order to understand what is happening in the arts and in literature in China at this very moment. So just to sum up two ideas. One, arts need to function a specific social function. They need to be useful and they need to be positive. And I will start with this because what I want us to do now is to think about alignment. So is to think about how artists show full alignment with party line and what is the content that they feel that the party or they think that the party wants to see or want to hear And the way we split the research in the SWPS team is that I focus on visual arts. I do a little bit of theater. Now František does film and Piotr literature. So maybe we'll just do a really quick round and just imagine pieces of art and literature that fit ideally this the expectation. František, would you like to start with film? The ideal party film today.
Well, there is a word for it, of course. Those are the so-called main melody films, which, nowadays they represent, on the one hand, historical films, meaning, anything from the World War II or before the World War II, showing the heroism of Chinese nation in their fight against the Japanese oppressors or against Kuomintang in case of the Red Army. Or something that is moved more to the recent times, these kind of very classical Hollywood style action movies, showing a hero like Rambo style hero, against, the evil forces of West, basically. And then there are those more also historical or nowadays nostalgic films, like the trilogy, My Country, My People, My Country, My Homeland, My Country, My Parents, which kind of, enforce, or not enforce, but strengthen the idea of the unity of the nation with this nostalgic mood, so to say. So I think those are three examples of ideal things. Well, I could mention sci-fi as well, looking for the future, where China is the leader, technological leader, and, you can compare the 1990s Independence Day with the Shanghai Fortress, let's say, so the Americans were the savers before, now those are the Chinese. It's very simple, it's a cliche, but it's also some kind of an, ideal presentation of the strong nation, as Professor Lomová mentioned. So yeah, right. That's the ideal part.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now let's move to literature. Piotr, what would be the ideal work of literature that Xi Jinping would love to read and to see the whole nation read?
Yes, seeking for some kind of continuity that was introduced by Professor Lomová is a key, and ideal works of literature as seen by Xi Jinping, they kind of work within dichotomies. It should be popular, but not vulgar. It must be innovative, but not descend into absurdity. It is not wrong for writers to pursue money, but the literature should not have the stench of it, to be too influenced by the market or mammonism, or even worse, hedonism. So whenever Xi Jinping takes the stage to show his vision, he says this, but not this, within this kind of dichotomic terms, and some of his or party's key ideas, such as telling China's story well, or spreading the good/positive energy, remain key guidelines, at least on this propaganda and official line level.
All right. Okay, so I will maybe say a few words about visual arts. I've seen a lot of really bad art in the main galleries in China. And if I were to sum up, it's mostly the topic of progress and the topic of social harmony. So you see a lot of huge oil paintings, many meters high, showing the happiness of different nations, of different ethnic minorities. Well, in one nation, I'm sorry. That's just a slip of a tongue. And then you see, progress in the cities, very similar to 1950s art in Europe. Professor Lomová mentioned our socialist past in Czechia, in Poland. We all know this type of art, this positivistic socialist, social realism, where you see buildings being built, factories being run, a lot of smoke from the chimney that, you know, symbolizes progress. Now, of course, progress is not smoke from the chimney, but it's electric cars, you know, it's technology and things like this. So you see a lot of that. But another thing that you see maybe more in theater than in visual arts is the end effect of an audience participating in a given cultural event. So the audience should be happy and positive. So you should create art that makes people happy and look positively towards the future, so that when you participate in culture, you get elevated and you feel that there is a lot of optimism in you and in the country. So the end effect is as important as the content itself. At least I would sum it up like this. Professor Lomová, would you like to have a word on this little round, first round?
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to emphasize one thing which perhaps I did not say quite clearly in my talk. A remarkable feature of the ideology whose projection you observed, or something conforming to the ideology you observed in your research, is that it is vague. It is not very carefully pointed out, you can do this, you cannot do that. Yes, it is vague. And this is the anaconda effect, which I mentioned in the end. So the artists have to be, or are aware, that they have to take care not to cross the red lines which are not there. The red lines are in the head of the party, and you never know when you step on it or you don't. I did not follow in detail the cultural developments you summarized, but it confirms very well, to my understanding, what's going on in the cultural circles in China through reading newspapers, following some more theoretical discussions, etc. My question would be, how did you observe, how did you follow the attempt of the respective arts somehow to not to sacrifice the artistic creativity totally to the demands of the ideology? So how much and in which way you could observe certain, let's say, trends undermining the demands or avoiding the demands to enable the artist to express himself as he would like to express if he were not pushed by the ideological demands?
Yes, this is a really great question, and this is actually what we've focused on in our research, trying to really find, we were mostly interested in social topics, so topics of social interest. So we were trying to find how far artists can still express concern for social inequality or for other topics, and how they sort of try to communicate their interest towards the audience. And I think in all our research in different genres, that the tools are a little bit different. But what I can say first, before I give the floor to Piotr and František, is that there is a lot of creativity, and there's a lot of sort of attempts to show things, but not crossing the lines, as you have rightly said, that are never written down. So everything is fluent, everything is constantly changing, and people sort of balance on the border of what is permitted and what is not. What I'd like to add first is that we talked about the reins of ideology, but there is also another pressure that we have not mentioned yet. This is the pressure of the market. Artists are under tremendous pressure to produce things that can sell, so that they can have income, so that the managers, the cinemas, the publishing houses can also get some income. So there is a pressure from two sides. One is ideology, and one is this very, very cruel market. You know, culture is a product. It's a product on the market. People are fighting to get market access. And we need to understand China also in these very purely capitalistic terms, because this also influences the way artists and writers function. Piotr, František, who would like to have a go first?
Yes, I can offer a follow-up. Well, this metaphor of anaconda in a chandelier kind of suggests an existence of this like a monster of hard censorship, while now the ideological structure and the whole structure of cultural system in China is such that those 8 decades of political education of Chinese elites kind of resulted in a state that the power the party wished for. So there is no need for a kind of physical censor or even institutionalized one, even though they still exist, because the authors, publishers, editors, as well as all the other parts of the system, including even the masses of readers, for example, have accepted the state and are motivated to keep within the limits to maintain both social and economic status.
Okay, František, you want to show us something different in film?
Well, first of all, I agree what Piotr just said, but I would like to stress that censors do exist and they are very much active, and they do not choose who to target. And very good example is one of the latest movies of one of the most famous Chinese directors, Zhang Yimou, and his movie Tianru Panshi, or Under the Light in English, took 4 years to go through the censorship, and there had to be so many compromises done, and the script was heavily edited from different point of views, even to that extent that one of the main actors refused to watch the final the final result, because he was saying that this is not the movie we started with. And you would have the maybe idea that such a famous guy who directed the opening of the Olympics and whatnot would not have problem with censors, but even him was needed to comply. So that's one quite important thing, that the censorship is there, and especially if you touch on something that really resembles reality, you get under the scrutiny. And that's the funny thing, because you have the realism, the prescriptive realism, as Jason McGrath calls it in film. But you can't go anywhere near anything that, resembles a reality. And that's what happened actually to Zhang Yimou. His story was too similar to something that really happened in Chongqing, 10 years ago. So that would be one thing, and then I just wanted to also stress that yes, Marcin, it is right that there is a big dichotomy between the market and the ideology. Even the China Film Administration in the I think it was 14th five-year plan for Chinese film published in 2021. They mentioned that the social role of the film is more important than the market role. But in practice, it doesn't work like that, because I talked to the production companies, I talked to the artists during my last trip in China, and I was told by each and every one of them that the biggest problem of Chinese film right now is the market, that people don't go to cinemas, and that it might be even bigger problem than the censorship, because you can make film, you can go around censorship, but if the film doesn't succeed, you have no chance to making another. So yeah, this is my point of view in that. Yeah.
Yes, Olga, go ahead.
I would like just to make a small remark on the market, more on general level. I don't have any case studies. The market demands are also can be instrumentalized by the ideology. So you can write a novel, but then the publisher says, yes, I want to publish it, it will be successful, but you have to cut out these parts because they may offend or they are against the ideology, and actually the market can align with the ideology. And this is something which the Communist Party of China is doing everywhere. It tries to align market and ideology. I agree that market is an independent and particular power, but it's not totally independent. It's also part of the system. And another remark I wanted to make is that I would perhaps slightly disagree with Piotr, or would like to add something. Yes, majority of readers are not interested in some original explorations into human soul and social realities and so on. But there are definitely in the intellectual circles pockets of resistance, in the sense that they know what it is to create good literature and have different demands. Of course, may not be successful. There is a lot of self-publishing, by the way, yeah. And I would point out particularly to the area of poetry, which I think is this is the segment which, by its very nature, strives for some sort of intellectual honesty and independence more than big novels which are, well, written primarily for the market. So I would just differentiate different aspects of literature.
Yeah, maybe Piotr, you would like to relate, but before you do that, I would like to relate to the first point. Olga, it was a very good point about, you know, how ideology and politics also shape the market. And here there is another component that I think we can add to the sort of censorship system that you just reminded me of, that we haven't mentioned it yet. It's the audience and the nationalistic feelings in the audiences. This is huge censorship on the artists. There was one very important painter, I will not name him, who was one of top political pop painters in 1990s, and he got attacked recently in a very ugly way through social media just by ordinary Chinese for paintings he did 20 years ago, because they were considered not patriotic enough. So you have this another sort of whip that is over the artists and writers, that if an ordinary person from the audience tells you that you don't love China, now this is a very, very serious threat for your activity. Piotr, would you like to relate to the second issue?
Yes, well, I certainly did not mean to say that writers or artists in China are kind of like uniform body that toes the official line, but it rather touches upon the topic that we haven't talked about yet. That is this the ways that Chinese artists use to go around this, because this official unpredictability kind of results in let's say unusual, very Chinese specific ways of artistic strategies, so to say. Yu Hua once called it like as the spirit of May 35th. May 35th as an obvious reference to Tiananmen Square. So so there are plenty of tactics that we still have not talked about. So what I meant earlier is like the general landscape, or the final outcome that the system has produced, and it applies to like the grand majority of creators.
Let's talk about these tactics, because that also brings us back to Professor Lomová's previous question. So how do artists cope with the system and try to sneak in some of the content that might not be so welcome by the party? And I think in our research that is also included in the policy brief that we will be publishing in a few weeks' time, we have some content like this. And maybe I can start with one anecdote, which I think it's quite telling. Now, last year, I was at a very important theater festival in China, and there is this very well-known theater director called Meng Jinhui, and he has a production entitled Chou Chong, The Bug in English, and it's a production that he showed in different stages. Now, I watched this production at a theater festival far from Beijing, and I was actually quite surprised that it was quite daring. They were using some of the sentences that were quite critical of the social reality in China, and they even used the word Communist Party, which is a taboo word in theater productions. And I was very surprised. And after the show, when I discussed this with Director Meng, I asked him, well, are you not afraid? And he was, well, I know what I can say were. Now, there are stages where I can't say things, and I don't try. But a theater festival outside the capital is a place where there is a relative freedom, so I can adjust the play to this audience. So there is this huge flexibility on what you talk to whom, when and where. And if you know the ropes, then maybe you can say a little bit more somewhere. But you try to keep it as safe as you can so that you don't step over the line in a place which is maybe less friendly. So this is one strategy of sort of working in this environment. Any other ideas, guys, or Professor Lomová, you would like to share with everyone?
Well, maybe I do one more remark on the Xi Jinping speech. He particularly touches upon the issue that there are people working independently outside of the official writers and artists associations. And as you all know, the official associations until recently were the goal of many artists and writers because they could get some social security there. It was economically safe. At the same time, they have to be part of the system, including regular party meetings, education meetings. I remember one artist told me many years ago, yes, we do have every week a political education meeting, but nobody cares. Our chair of the party organization reads something from the newspaper, the women are knitting, and the men are meditating, and we somehow survive, and it's all over. So I am afraid the knitting and meditating situation is now changing, and there is also a growing number, I mentioned it, of artists outside of the system, which Xi Jinping particularly touches upon. And he says, this is a huge potential for the future of our art and literature, and we have to tap the potential, and we have to create environment for them to get the services of the party. And somehow there is clearly from his speech, there is clearly a need felt by the party to rein in those who dare to be independent or who don't want to be part of the system and publish on the internet and can avoid sensitive words and get published and so on and so on. We know the case of Leroy, the famous writer who just left the Writers Association because he was disgusted by the political and ideological dimensions of his staying within it. So we may expect, at least if the pattern of a speech and then the action still works as it did in the past, we may expect a huge movement within the Communist Party to penetrate all the independent corners of those, the so-called gray zone of artists and writers who are not dissidents, who are not openly, very dangerously critical of the party, but they keep some independence of theirs. And I think this is something to be followed in the nearest future.
Yes, very interesting indeed. František, Piotr, would you like to share some strategies? I have another idea I want to talk about, but I give the floor to you first.
Well, if I may, I would be very brief. First, I would like to say that unfortunately the filmmakers, they don't have this freedom of flexibility as maybe the theater guys have, because once the film is done, it's done. And also, it used to be that you could kind of export the film to like foreign film festivals in one form, and then show it in China in another form after the censorship. But now it doesn't work like that. You need an approval. And actually, there is the recent case of quite famous directors showing their movies in Taiwan in the Golden Horse Festival, and it's a big thing now. Like lately, really in the recent days, where they even won some prizes, and it wasn't approved to show them there. But regarding the strategies. Well, there are always compromises you have to make, and in my research, I revealed a few of them. They are the explanatory postscripts. So you have a film that deals with the crime or something like that, and then you have to explain to the audience, and you have to be didactic basically, and tell the audience that everybody was punished according to the law. And in case of the Zhang Yimou movie I just mentioned, it was like, and the government implemented anti-corruption campaigns, and this means that everything ends well, basically. Even though we have the problem with corrupt officials, but we are solving it because the government has their policies that help to solve them, basically. And then and then of course you have other ways. For example, you make a comedy. So you go genre-wise. You make a comedy, you entertain people in the first part, and then you maybe can convey socially critical message in the second part, and it quite works. Those films really, if you dig deep into them, you can really reveal some social critique. So yeah, just two examples of how it might work in China to go around the censorship. Yeah.
All right, very interesting. You see, in different genres, we have completely different reality and also different strategies. So that's quite interesting. Piotr, would you like to add anything, or shall I just say a little bit about visual arts?
Yes, a short remark, if I may. I think the word independence that Professor Lomová mentioned earlier might be the key, instead of framing artists as being either this or that. I have like a very short paragraph from Moyen that I think kind of could add something to a discussion. It's about an independent farmer who refuses to hand over his small parcel of land during collectivization. I have nothing against the Communist Party, and I definitely have nothing against Chairman Mao. I'm not opposed to the People's Commune or to collectivization. I just want to be left alone to work for myself. And I think this could be a way we perceive at least some of these writers. Let's talk about Dong Bei writing, for instance, very much on top recently in China's literary circles. So these writers, they kind of focus on massive layoffs that happened 20 years ago, but only after the work is published, people kind of wonder, okay, it feels relevant now. It feels relevant because we feel insecure. And in this way, we may wonder, okay, is it a social critique, or is it directed at someone? These are part of, so to say, reader response, kind of like reader response theory, kind of reading of a text. But was it a strategy, or is it only what happens to a text? Maybe the text is a problematic not because the writer sits down and thinks, okay, how can I be subversive this time, or how do I play this game now with the apparatus? They just want to be left to write alone, and once the text is out, it's you never know. It's at some point it may be a poisonous weapon against the society. And 5 years later, it could be a precious stone is praised for great positive energy. It's very ambivalent,
Yeah, I can imagine that there are different artists, different attitudes, different ideas, different ambitions as well. And we also need to, of course, recognize this. Just a few words about visual arts, because I think it's quite interesting. I see very brave visual artists that were active in China in the 1980s. So we can say that this is the first generation of people from the reform and opening up era. Most of them left China, but some of them are still there, and they are quite daring. But I also see quite a number of young people who also are quite explicit in the critique. And what I noticed as, I think, a strategy, I don't know if it's a strategy by artists or by galleries, is that galleries do show these works of art, but they're very careful how they write about them. So if you enter an exhibition, you have a description of an artist and you have a description of what the artist is showing, and the description doesn't really fit the object. You know, the description tells about something, and I look at the object, and to me it's like absolutely clear that it's a critical piece of art, and you don't find it in the description, and you don't have a catalog published. So after the exhibition is gone, you don't have a lot of the traces of what was shown. And I saw works that criticized Chinese policies in Xinjiang, that criticized coercion by the Chinese government, that criticized many things, but you didn't have a word of this from the curators, and you could not read it on the walls of the galleries. So I think this is just one way of showing it. If you understand things, well, this is yours. You can take it home and think about it. If you don't understand it, well, then you don't, but it's not a threat. So I guess there is a little bit of freedom in how you interpret things, and silence and emptiness, I think, become a very, very important tool of communication. And this is something which is quite interesting. We will need to be showing, ending the show soon, but Professor Lomová, I would give you an opportunity now to relate to some of the things that we discussed before we wrap up.
It was all very interesting. I think it also enables me to think in a more nuanced way on my topic. I would make one remark on subversion, and to be left to myself, the Moyen quotation, which I liked so much, Piotr used. Yeah. The problem is that the dichotomy, or not dichotomy, the different positions, not only two of them that exist. There is one position to be left to oneself, to be honest with myself. And this is the problem. Yeah, the artist and the writer would like to be left to himself or herself and to be honest with himself or herself, not being imposed to write something which he doesn't have on his heart. And it doesn't have to be critical writing. What's the problem in the Xi Jinping era? As I follow the ideology, cultural policy, changing trends since 1980s, I think the problem with the Xi Jinping era is that anything that is not subordinated, explicitly subordinated to the party, is potentially subversive. There was much more space for critical discourse in 1980s, of course, but even in 1990s and in the beginning of the 21st century, there could be honest expressions of oneself without the danger of becoming immediately subversive. So the new trend with Xi Jinping is actually going back to the time. I think it is not possible, but this is his idea. Going back to the time when the party really had literature, art under its control. So I would close with these remarks.
Thank you very much. These are not optimistic remarks, but then we believe in the strength of culture and literature, at least I do. And it's very difficult to, I put it in other words, looking at Chinese history, there were different periods of state control over the arts, and in the long run, it didn't work. So I do hope that we will have some artistic freedom left, and Chinese arts will be still developing beautifully despite a very unfriendly situation that is faced by artists and writers right now. I would like to thank the three wonderful people and experts who participated in this webinar. First of all, Professor Olga Lomová from Charles University in Prague. Thank you very much, Olga.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you very much to my two colleagues from our SWPS University research team, František Reismüller. Thank you, František.
The pleasure is mine.
And thank you, Piotr Machajek, also from SWPS University.
Thank you very much.
And you were watching a webinar presenting research on Chinese culture conducted as part of the China Horizons Research Grant funded by the European Commission. Thank you very much.